The matchmaking office on Nexus 7 space station always smelled like lavender and disappointment. Thera ducked her head as she entered through the doorway, her 9-foot frame barely fitting through the entrance designed for average-sized species. Her blue-tinted skin caught the soft light from above, making her look like a walking piece of twilight sky. "Back again, dear." Ms. Zix, the tentacled matchmaker, didn't even need to check her records. This was Thera's 5th visit this cycle, and nothing had changed since the last time. Thera settled carefully onto the reinforced chair specially installed for larger species. Even then, her knees nearly touched her chest. "I thought maybe something changed in your database." Ms. Zix's tentacles twisted in what most species recognized as a sympathetic gesture. "I ran another search this morning, knowing you'd come." She adjusted her viewing screen so Thera could see it. "The problem remains the same. Centaurian males average 6 feet in height. The tallest one in our database is 7 feet, and he's already paired." Thera's shoulders slumped. At 9 feet tall, she towered over every potential mate from her species. Her parents had always told her she'd been blessed by the stars with her height, but right now, it felt more like a curse. "What about other species?" Thera asked, trying to keep hope alive in her voice. "Surely there must be someone." "I checked compatible species too." Ms. Zix pulled up another screen. "The Draconians are tall enough, but their genetic structure is completely incompatible with Centaurians. The Morgolians have the right height, but their atmosphere requirements would make cohabitation impossible." She paused, her professional demeanor softening. "I'm sorry, dear. You're simply unique." Neither of them noticed the human sitting in the waiting area, apparently absorbed in his data pad, but actually listening to every word. Marcus Chen, Earth's leading anthropologist on interspecies relationships, found himself completely fascinated by the conversation. Thera stood up, having to bend awkwardly to avoid hitting the ceiling. "Thank you for trying again, Ms. Zix. I should get back to the Arboretum. The Venusian snapdragons need feeding." As Thera made her way out, Marcus watched her go, his scientist's mind already racing with possibilities. He'd spent years studying how different species overcame biological and cultural barriers to form relationships. This situation presented an interesting challenge. He glanced down at his data pad, where he'd been reviewing human history. Throughout Earth's past, humans had consistently done what other species considered impossible. They'd survived in environments that should have killed them, built cities in places that should have remained uninhabitable, and formed bonds that crossed every imaginable boundary. The matchmaker's computer might say it was impossible, but Marcus knew better. Humans had a saying, "Where there's a will, there's a way." And right now, watching the tall, graceful alien woman leave with slumped shoulders, Marcus felt his will to solve this puzzle growing stronger. He made a quick note in his research journal. Day 245 on Nexus 7. Possible case study in human adaptability versus alien social norms. Subject: Centaurian female, approximately 9 feet tall. Question: Can human ingenuity overcome extreme physical differences in interspecies relationships? Marcus smiled to himself. He'd need to visit the Arboretum soon. After all, he'd always been interested in Venusian snapdragons. Outside the office, Thera walked through the crowded station corridors, other species automatically moving aside to let her pass. She'd gotten used to the stares, the whispers, the way people had to crane their necks to look at her face. What she couldn't get used to was the loneliness. Little did she know that was about to change, thanks to a curious human who didn't believe in impossible situations. The Nexus 7 Arboretum was a marvel of engineering, with its 50-foot ceilings and climate-controlled zones. For Thera, it was the only place on the station where she didn't feel too big. Here, among the towering alien plants, she could stand at her full height without worrying about hitting her head. She was tending to a particularly temperamental Venusian snapdragon when she heard footsteps behind her. Without turning, she sighed. The viewing hours are in the afternoon cycle. Please come back then. Actually, I'm here to learn about Centaurian cultivation techniques, a calm voice replied. I'm particularly interested in how your people adapted Earth's roses to grow on your homeworld. Thera turned around, ready to correct the visitor's mistake, and found herself still having to look down, but not as much as usual. A human male stood there, about 6 feet tall, holding a data pad and wearing the blue uniform of a researcher. I'm Marcus Chen, xenanthropologist, he said, meeting her eyes without the usual neck craning most species needed. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation at the matchmaker's office. Thera's face darkened to a deeper blue, her species' version of a blush. Oh, you're here to study the poor lonely giant then. Add me to your research papers. Marcus smiled, pulling up something on his data pad. Actually, I'm here because I think Ms. Zix's computer is working with outdated information. Did you know that on Earth, we have something called basketball? He showed her a video of humans playing the sport. Some of our players are over 7 feet tall. They marry people of all heights. One famous player was 7'7" and married someone who was 5'2". But they're the same species, Thera pointed out, though she found herself interested despite her initial annoyance. It's different with interspecies relationships. Is it? Marcus walked over to one of her work tables, gesturing at the various plants. Look at what you do here. You take plants from completely different worlds and help them thrive together. Some even cross-pollinate to create new species. Why should intelligent beings be any different? Thera found herself laughing. Are you comparing relationships to gardening? Why not? Both require understanding, adaptation, and care. He pointed to a nearby plant. That's a earth cactus growing next to a Centaurian water bloom, isn't it? 2 plants that should be completely incompatible, yet here they are, sharing the same space. Because I adjusted the soil composition and created a special watering schedule, Thera said, then paused as she caught his meaning. Oh, exactly. The key isn't finding a perfect match. It's being willing to make adjustments. Marcus stepped closer, though still keeping a respectful distance. Humans have a long history of adapting to challenges that other species consider impossible. It's kind of our thing. Thera studied him carefully. Most species she met either treated her with awkward politeness or barely hidden discomfort. This human seemed genuinely interested in talking to her. You're not afraid of me. Should I be? You're obviously gentle enough to handle these delicate plants. Being tall doesn't make you scary. It just makes you unique. For the first time in months, Thera felt herself standing up straighter instead of trying to appear smaller. You're a strange one, Marcus Chen. Most humans I've met barely look at me. Most humans you've met weren't anthropologists fascinated by interspecies cultural exchange, he replied with a grin. Would you be willing to tell me about Centaurian dating customs? For research purposes, of course. Thera found herself smiling back. Only if you'll explain more about these basketball players of yours. For research purposes, naturally. Neither of them noticed the Venusian snapdragon watching their interaction, its petals turning a bright pink, the color of budding romance in response to nearby pheromones. Plants, after all, often notice things that people missed. News travels fast on a space station, especially when it involves a 9-foot-tall Centaurian and a human being seen together in public spaces. By the end of the station's weekly cycle, everyone on Nexus 7 was talking about them. Thera and Marcus sat in the station's multicultural cafeteria, sharing a meal while trying to ignore the stares. Thera's special-sized chair made a strange contrast with Marcus's standard one, but he didn't seem to mind looking up at her while they talked. Your message board is blinking again, Marcus pointed out, nodding toward Thera's communicator. She sighed, glancing at the device. Another message from the family council. They're not happy. She picked up her fork, specially designed for her larger hands. They say I'm embarrassing our entire species by spending time with a primitive race. Primitive. Marcus laughed, taking a bite of his Earth-style sandwich. We're primitive because we don't have height requirements for relationships. Before Kythera could answer, a familiar set of tentacles appeared at their table. Ms. Zix, the matchmaker, looked flustered. "This is highly irregular," the matchmaker said, her tentacles twisting nervously. "Kythera, dear, you're causing quite a stir. Humans aren't even in our compatibility database." "Maybe your database needs updating," Marcus suggested calmly. He pulled out his datapad. "I've been doing research. Did you know humans have successfully dated and married species with much bigger physical differences than height? There's a famous case of a human-Jovian relationship, and Jovians are basically living gas clouds." Ms. Zix's tentacles went pale. But the protocols, the traditions. "Sometimes traditions need to change," Thera said softly, surprising herself with her boldness. "Marcus has shown me that maybe we've been looking at this all wrong." Other diners were openly watching now. At a nearby table, a young Centaurian female, only 7 feet tall and considered too short by her people, was listening with great interest. Thera's communicator blinked again. This time it was a video call from her parents. With a deep breath, she answered it, letting Marcus stay in view. "Daughter," her father's stern face filled the screen. "We've heard disturbing rumors. Please tell us you're not actually courting the human." "Father, Marcus is a xenoanthropologist. He's helping me understand how different species can." "A human scientist. Even worse, they'll turn you into a research project." Her mother's face pushed into view. "Think of your status, your future. No proper Centaurian family will accept this." Marcus leaned forward, carefully staying in view. "Sir, madam, if I may, I'm not studying Kythera. I'm learning from her, just as she's learning from me. Humans have a saying, the heart doesn't measure in feet and inches." The cafeteria had gone quiet, everyone watching this unusual scene. Kythera felt her face turning deep blue with embarrassment, but also with something else. Pride. Pride that this small human wasn't afraid to stand up to her family's prejudices. "This is unacceptable," her father declared. "Kythera, you will return home immediately for—" "No." Kythera's voice was firm. "I'm staying on Nexus 7. And I'm going to continue seeing Marcus. He's shown me that compatibility isn't about height or species. It's about understanding and respect." After her parents hung up in shock, the cafeteria remained silent for a moment. Then, from somewhere in the back, someone started clapping. Others joined in. The young Centaurian female from the other table stood up and walked over. "How did you find the courage?" she asked Kythera. "I've been told I'm too short my whole life." "Maybe," Marcus said gently, "it's time for all of us to stop letting others decide what makes a good match." Ms. Zix, who had been watching everything, suddenly pulled out her own datapad. I suppose I could create a new category in the database. For adaptive matches." Kythera smiled, looking around at all the faces, supportive, curious, and some still disapproving. Change wasn't easy, but as Marcus had taught her, nothing worth doing ever was. Marcus's research lab on Nexus 7 had become their favorite meeting spot after hours. While other spaces made their height difference obvious, here among the scattered data pads and holographic displays, it somehow felt natural. Kythera sat cross-legged on the floor, while Marcus excitedly showed her his latest findings. "Look at this," he said, pulling up a holographic image of various human couples throughout history. "I've been researching cases of height differences in human relationships. There was a famous couple in the 1800s. He was 8'11", and she was 4'7". More than 4 feet difference." Kythera watched the images with fascination. And they were happy. "They were married for 30 years, Marcus smiled, swiping to another image. "Humans have always found ways to adapt. It's in our nature to overcome physical challenges." He brought up another display, this one showing statistical data. "I've analyzed hundreds of cases. The success of a relationship has zero correlation with height difference. It's all about compatibility in other areas. Shared interests, communication, mutual respect. As they talked, neither noticed Dr. Xan, the station's head scientist, watching from the doorway. The elderly Vulperian had been skeptical of their relationship at first, but something about their interactions had caught his professional interest. Fascinating methodology, Mr. Chen, Dr. Xan said, making his presence known. Both Kythera and Marcus turned to face him. But have you considered the practical aspects? Marcus nodded eagerly. Actually, yes. I've been working on that too. He pulled up another display. Look at these adaptations humans have already made for interspecies interactions. Special chairs, adjusted doorways, custom tools. We're already solving these problems every day on the station. Kythera reached for one of the data pads, her large fingers carefully handling the small device. Marcus has been teaching me human customs too. Did you know they have something called dance, where height differences can actually be an advantage? Dr. Xan's ears perked up with interest. Really? How so? Marcus stood up and held out his hand to Kythera. May I demonstrate? Kythera carefully got to her feet, ducking slightly under the lab's ceiling. Marcus showed her how to position her hands, one in his and one on his shoulder, while he placed his other hand at her waist. In human partner dancing, Marcus explained to Dr. Xan, different heights can create beautiful lines and movements. What others see as a problem, we see as an opportunity for creativity. They took a few careful steps together, moving in a simple waltz pattern. Kythera had been practicing, and their movements were surprisingly graceful despite their size difference. Dr. Xan watched them thoughtfully. Your research is quite thorough, Mr. Chen. But what about the Centaurian Council? They're not likely to be convinced by human dancing. That's why I'm documenting everything, Marcus said, still moving with Kythera. Every successful interaction, every solved problem, every adaptation we make. I'm building a scientific case for interspecies relationships based on actual data rather than traditional assumptions. Kythera smiled down at him. He's even learned Centaurian respiratory patterns, so we can synchronize our breathing during activities. Most of my own people don't bother learning that. Dr. Xan took out his own data pad and made some notes. Perhaps this deserves further study. Would you be willing to let me document your findings, Mr. Chen? This could be valuable research for future interspecies relations. Marcus gently spun Kythera under his arm, a move they'd practiced carefully. Of course, the more evidence we can gather, the better chance we have of changing minds. And hearts, Kythera added softly, her blue skin glowing with happiness. As Dr. Xan left the lab, he heard them discussing their next research project, analyzing successful interspecies couples across the galaxy. He shook his head, amazed. Trust a human to turn a controversial relationship into a scientific breakthrough. Behind him, Kythera's laugh echoed down the corridor as Marcus showed her another Earth dance move. Sometimes, the elderly scientist thought, the best research subjects were the ones who didn't know they were making history. The message that changed everything arrived during Kythera's morning shift at the Arboretum. The holographic seal of the Centaurian High Council glowed ominously above her workstation, casting a purple light over the plants. Citizen Kythera, the stern face of Council Leader Viewership filled her view. Your situation has become a matter of planetary concern. Your interactions with the human have been noted, documented, and deemed inappropriate for someone of your social standing. Kythera's hands trembled as she continued pruning a delicate vine, trying to maintain her composure. With respect, Council Leader, my personal life is no longer personal, Viewership cut in. Videos of you and the human have spread across 3 star systems. Young Centaurians are questioning our height-based social structure. This morning, a group of sub-height citizens protested outside the matching bureau on the homeworld. Kythera almost dropped her pruning shears. She hadn't expected this. Behind her, the Venusian snapdragon sensed her distress and turned a worried shade of gray. You will return home immediately for social reconditioning, Viewership declared. A transport ship has already been. The transmission suddenly split into two screens as Marcus patched himself in. He appeared calm and professional in his researcher's uniform. "Council Leader Varrock," Marcus said politely, "I apologize for the interruption, but as the station's leading xenoanthropologist, I must point out that forcing Cthulhu to return home violates 3 interstellar treaties regarding personal freedom." Varrock's face darkened. "This is a Zentorian matter, human. You have no standing." Actually, a new voice joined in as Dr. Xan added himself to the call. "Mr. Chen has full academic standing in this matter. His research on interspecies relationships has just been accepted for publication in the Galactic Scientific Journal." The arboretum door slid open as Ms. Zix hurried in, her tentacles waving excitedly. "Cthulhu, you won't believe what's happening at the matchmaking office." Varrock looked increasingly frustrated as his simple disciplinary call turned into an impromptu conference. "What is the meaning of? Young Zentorians are submitting relationship applications with non-height matched partners," Ms. Zix announced, ignoring the council leader's glare. "Not just with humans, with all sorts of species. They're calling it the Cthulhu Revolution." Cthulhu sank into her reinforced chair, overwhelmed. She had only wanted to find happiness for herself. She hadn't meant to start a social movement. Marcus's voice softened. "Council Leader, perhaps instead of fighting this change, you could guide it. The Zentorian people clearly want more freedom in choosing their partners. Cthulhu and I have proven that height differences can be overcome with understanding and respect. And proper scientific methodology," Dr. Xan added helpfully. Varrock's image flickered as he received something off-screen. His eyes widened. "The High Chamber is reporting protests have spread to 5 more cities. They're demanding." He looked incredulous. "Dancing lessons." Despite her nervousness, Cthulhu couldn't help but laugh. The sound seemed to break some of the tension in the air. "Council Leader," she said, standing tall for perhaps the first time in her life, "my relationship with Marcus has taught me that our traditions can grow without being destroyed. We can honor our heritage while allowing for new possibilities." Varrock was silent for a long moment, reading more reports off-screen. Finally, he sighed. "The Council will consider these developments. But be warned, we will be watching your relationship closely. If this ends badly." "It won't," Marcus said firmly, looking up at Cthulhu with complete confidence. "Some things are worth any challenge." After the transmission ended, Cthulhu looked around at her unlikely support group, a human scientist, a tentacled matchmaker, and a prestigious xenobiologist. "Thank you, all of you." "Don't thank us yet," Ms. Zix said, checking her datapad. "My office is flooded with new applications. We're going to need to create an entirely new matching system. I think." Marcus smiled, taking Cthulhu's hand. "That's exactly what your people need." The Zentorian delegation arrived on Nexus 7 in a ship that barely fit in the station's largest docking bay. They were all exactly 6 feet tall, the perfect height according to traditional standards. Leading them was Master Ural, the most respected compatibility assessor in the Zentorian Empire. Cthulhu and Marcus waited at the docking bay with Dr. Xan and Ms. Zix. The delegation's arrival had turned into a station-wide event, with creatures of all sizes gathering to watch. "Remember," Marcus whispered to Cthulhu, "we have nothing to prove to them. We know what we have is real." Master Ural approached them, his ceremonial robes flowing perfectly around his regulation height frame. "Cthulhu of the High Garden family," he announced formally, "we have come to assess the validity of your unconventional pairing." "Welcome to Nexus 7, Master Ural," Cthulhu bowed respectfully, while Marcus followed with a traditional Zentorian greeting gesture he had practiced. Ural's eyebrows rose slightly at Marcus's perfect execution of the greeting. "You have taught him our ways." "We teach each other," Cthulhu replied. "That's what a partnership is about." The assessor pulled out an ancient-looking device made of crystal and metal. "The traditional trials must be performed. If you fail, you must return home immediately." He paused, looking at Marcus. unless the human wishes to withdraw. These trials were designed for Zentorians. Marcus stepped forward. Actually, I have a suggestion. The crowd leaned in to listen. Why not combine our traditions? Add human elements to your trials. That way, we can prove we're truly compatible in both cultures. A murmur ran through the watching crowd. No one had ever dared to suggest modifying the sacred trials before. Ural's face showed surprise, then interest. You propose to alter trials that have existed for 10,000 years. Not alter, Marcus said carefully. Enhance. For example, your heartbeat synchronization trial. We could combine it with a human waltz. Double the challenge, double the proof of compatibility. Dr. Xan stepped forward. As the station's chief scientist, I could monitor and verify all results. This would add scientific validity to the traditional measures. Ural consulted with his fellow delegates in hushed tones. The crowd waited breathlessly. Finally, he turned back. Very well. We will create hybrid trials, but they must be completed within one station cycle, and they must be public. He gestured to his assistants, who began setting up various mysterious devices around the docking bay. Public, Cthera whispered nervously. Marcus took her hand. Perfect. Let everyone see that love doesn't care about height. Ural raised his ceremonial staff. The first trial begins in 1 hour. Prepare yourselves. He paused, looking at their joined hands. Though I must warn you, in 300 years as an assessor, I have never seen a non-traditional pair pass these trials. Then it's time someone did, Marcus replied confidently. He turned to Cthera, ready to make history. She squeezed his hand gently, careful of her strength. With you? Always. As the crowd dispersed and the delegation began their preparations, Ms. Zix approached them with tears in her eyes. Do you know how many couples are watching this? Not just Zentorians, everyone who's ever been told they don't match traditional standards. You're giving them hope. Hope is good, Marcus smiled, but we're going to give them more than that. We're going to give them proof. Dr. Xan was already setting up his monitoring equipment. This will be fascinating data for my research on interspecies adaptation. Thera looked around at all the activity, then down at Marcus. I'm nervous, she admitted quietly. Good, he replied. Being nervous means it matters. But remember what I told you about human history. We're at our best when everyone says something's impossible. The ancient assessment devices hummed to life, casting ethereal patterns on the station balls. In 1 hour, they would begin the trials that would either change Zentorian society forever or end their relationship completely. But looking at each other, they knew one thing for certain. Win or lose, they were about to show the galaxy what was possible when two hearts refused to be bound by traditional limitations. The first trial began exactly 1 hour later in Nexus 7's largest observation dome. Stars twinkled above through the transparent ceiling as Master Ural raised his ceremonial staff. The trial of physical harmony, he announced to the packed room. Traditionally, couples must maintain perfect balance while connected by energy bonds. Today, we add the human element. They must do this while performing their dance. Blue energy crackled between Cthera and Marcus, linking their wrists and ankles. The energy bonds would break if they moved out of sync even slightly. Ready? Marcus whispered, looking up at Cthera. She nodded, remembering their practice sessions, just like in the lab. The music began, a beautiful mix of Zentorian harmony and Earth's waltz rhythm. They started moving, Cthera carefully matching her steps to Marcus's lead. The height difference that everyone said made them impossible now made them spectacular to watch. Remarkable, Dr. Xan muttered, checking his instruments. Their neural patterns are synchronizing. The crowd gasped as Marcus guided Cthera into a graceful spin. The energy bonds stretched but didn't break. They had practiced this for weeks, each movement calculated to work with their height difference rather than against it. Second trial. Ural called out as they completed the dance perfectly. Mental resonance. This trial required them to solve complex puzzles while sharing one mental space, the human edition. They had to do it while telling each other jokes. Why did the astronaut break up with the star? Marcus asked as they worked through a quantum equation together. Cthera smiled, moving a holographic piece into place. Because she needed her space. The crowd laughed, and even some of the Zentorian delegates cracked smiles. The puzzles grew harder, but their shared laughter made the solutions come easier. Third trial, strength calibration. This was the one they had worried about. Cthera's natural strength could easily hurt a human. They had to carry a crystal sphere together. If she gripped too hard, it would shatter, too soft, and it would fall. "Trust me," Cthera whispered as they reached for the sphere. Marcus nodded. "Always." They lifted the sphere together, finding perfect balance between their different strengths. The human edition here. They had to walk across a narrow beam while telling each other 3 things they loved about one another. "I love how you see solutions where others see problems," Cthera said, taking careful steps. "I love how you're gentle with everything you care about," Marcus replied, matching her pace. The sphere glowed brighter with each truth they shared. Hours passed as they faced trial after trial. Some they completed perfectly, others they struggled with but never gave up. The final trial was the hardest, the test of future vision. "You must share your deepest fears about your future together," Ural explained. "The human edition. You must then show how you plan to overcome them." Cthera went first. "I fear I'll never fully fit into your world," she admitted. Marcus squeezed her hand. "And I fear I'll never be enough in yours. But that's why we're creating our own world, together." The monitoring crystals around them pulsed with bright light. Dr. Xan's instruments were going crazy with positive readings. Master Ural studied his ancient devices, his expression unreadable. The entire station seemed to hold its breath. Finally, he looked up. "In all my years, I have never seen 2 beings work so perfectly to overcome their differences. You didn't just pass the trials. You transformed them into something new." The crowd erupted in cheers. Ms. Zix was openly crying, her tentacles waving happily. Dr. Xan was frantically saving all the data. "Thank you," Cthera said to Ural, "for giving us a chance to prove ourselves." The assessor smiled slightly. "No, thank you, for proving that our oldest traditions can learn new dances." Marcus grinned. Speaking of dances, he pulled Cthera into a celebration spin, making the crowd cheer louder. They had done it, not by denying their differences, but by turning them into strengths. As they celebrated under the stars, both knew that this was just the beginning of their story.